All right, we're going to call the Audit Committee to order.
There are none.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I understand we don't have any public speakers.
Murray's not here?
Murray's not here. So I think we go on to the approval of the February 22nd and March 19th minutes. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Mike, can you take us through the work plan?
Yeah, there are no changes to the work plan. The next meeting is scheduled for July. We'll cover the first quarter 2018 financial statements, the 2017 single audit report, the investment compliance report, management letters, ERM update, ethics and compliance, and the 2018 audit plan status.
Thank you, Mike. Next, we have Pat Kane, MTA Comptroller, to present the management's review, discussion, and analysis of the 2017 consolidated financial statements. Pat?
Okay. Good afternoon. This is in page 16 in your workbook of the Audit Committee. Let's see here. Okay, I'm going to present the MTA Consolidated 2017 fiscal year-end financial statements. Financial statements are prepared in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles using the government accounting standards, otherwise known as GASB. There are 5 sections. For 2017, there were 5 new GASBs. Luckily, only one of them affected the MTA's financial statements, GASB 82. This standard modified a payroll-related measure called covered payroll. The definition of covered payroll is now pensionable earnings as opposed to all earnings, and that's used in one of the calculations in the schedules in the back of the financial statements. There's a percentage called contributions as a percent of covered payroll. So minor impact on our financials. Okay, now we're going to take a look at the MTA's balance sheet, or as it's called in government, the statement of net position. MTA had assets of $80.3 billion, liabilities of $74.5 billion, and we have a net position of $5.2 billion. Going through some of the changes in the assets and deferred outflows, our cash and investments decreased by $293 million, due primarily to decreased cash of $449 million. Receivables decreased by $505 million due to decreased amounts due from insurance companies for Hurricane Sandy, as well as receivables due from New York State and New York City. Capital assets increased by $3.5 billion as a result of increased capital investments. Other assets increased by $63 million. Deferred outflows increased by $236 million. And deferred outflows for pensions decreased by $381 million due to higher than assumed investment returns, resulting in lower employer contributions. Next, we'll take a look at the liabilities and deferred inflows. Liabilities of $74.5 billion. Biggest one is our long-term debt of $40 billion, which increased $1.1 billion from the prior year. Then we have the other post-employment benefits of $16.7 billion. That's an increase of $1.6 billion from the prior year. Our pension liabilities went down this year, went down $878 million. And again, that's due to the favorable investment returns as compared to our investment return assumption. And again, that applies to the deferred inflows for pensions, and that's a deferral of the excess earnings on our pensions that's deferred, and it's amortized over years in the future. Okay, next we have our statement of net position. Our net position is $5.2 billion as compared to $5.6 billion last year, a decrease of $383 million. The net investment for capital assets increased by $2.5 billion, and that increase is a result of the increase in the capital assets netted by the increase in our liabilities, our debt of about $1 billion. Next, we have increase in restricted for debt service. We have increases in restricted for claims. Restricted for other purposes increased by $48 million. And then we have a decrease in our unrestricted net assets of $3 billion as compared to last year. And that decrease in our unrestricted is largely due to the increase in the unfunded OPEB liability of $1.6 billion. We had increase in other unrestricted liabilities and deferred inflows of about $100 million, a decrease in other unrestricted assets and deferred outflows of $830 million, and a deficit before depreciation and capital grants and appropriations of $587 million. Next, we take a look at our statement of cash flows. Our net cash from operating activities, that's our operating revenues compared to our operating expenses. We had net cash outflow of $3.8 billion. That's $396 higher than last year. We had net cash flow from non-capital financing activities of $6.6 billion, and those are basically the tax and subsidies receipts we get from the state and the city. So they were up by about $5 million. Net cash from capital and related financing activities, so that's the borrowing and the debt service and our capital expenditures. That was a net outflow of $3.1 billion, $77 million higher than last year. And then finally, we have net cash from investing activities of $118 million outflow versus $141 inflow last year. So our change in cash was $444 million for fiscal year 17. So ending year cash was $283 million versus $732 the prior year.
Why the significant change in the last column?
The 449, Mitch?
The 141 up to 118 down. Net cash from investing activities?
Yeah, the investing activities is really it's really a function of the inflows and outflows of our investments. So if we invest more cash in a particular year, then the investing activities would be a decline in cash. So actually the 118 really means that we invested more. We took money away from cash and invested it. Whereas in the prior year, the 141...
You mean invested it in non-cash...
Non-cash,
that's right. Deposits, for lack of a better...
Right.
For those of us who have a house budget, that's what you mean.
Yeah, short-term investments, short-term treasury bills, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, next we have our statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in that position. Operating deficit was $8.2 billion versus $7.6 billion the prior year. Subsidies and tax revenues of $6.5 billion versus $6.7 the prior year. Interest expense was $1.5 billion, $54 million higher than the prior year. So we have a deficit before capital grants and appropriations of $3.2 billion as compared to $2.4 billion in the prior year. Next, we have our capital revenues. Capital grants and appropriations were $2.7 billion, $494 million higher than the prior year. So for a total change in net position of $536 million versus a deficit, actually, of $536 versus a deficit of $204 the prior year. We also had a cumulative effect of change in accounting principle in fiscal year 17. So in 17, we had a change in accounting principle on how we amortize our bond premiums, and that had a cumulative prior year effect of $153 million on our net position to bring the net position down to $5.2 billion for the end of the year versus $5.6 the prior year. Okay, and next what we do is we do a reconciliation of the financial statement audited numbers compared to the numbers that were presented in the financial plan. So for total operating revenues, the financial statements have 8.7 versus, well, $71 million lower than the financial plan, so 1% difference. Our total operating expenses were slightly lower, $238 million lower. So on the net operating deficit, we're actually $167 million better than what was presented in the financial plan estimate. Moving down to dedicated taxes and subsidies, our actual was 27 million higher. Next, we have debt service. The financial plan debt service is principal and interest, whereas in the financial statements, we only show interest as debt service. The principal goes against the debt on the balance sheet. So that's not really a difference. That's just a different presentation here. 990, and then the financial plan nets down to a cash position. So we do a conversion where we add back non-cash liabilities, and that was 4.2 billion to come down at 254 for the financial plan versus 3.2 for the financial statements. On the next page, we have the details of the reconciliation between the financial plan and the financial statement. So the financial plan operating loss was 8.344 billion, and that reconciles down to the financial statement loss of 8.177 billion, a difference of 167 million, and then in there are the reconciling items. And then after that, we have the financial plan deficit after subsidies and debt service of 254 million. And in here, we have the reconciling items, which bring that down to the financial statement loss before capital grants and appropriations of 3.2 billion. That's the end of my presentation. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
No questions? Then now Mike Fritz, the engagement partner from Deloitte, is here to present the results of their audit of the 2017 MTA consolidated financial statements that Pat Kane just discussed, and the results of their audit of the individual agency financial statements. Mike?
Good afternoon. We handed out to you separately from your work package a document I'm going to go through, which are our communications that we share directly with you as audit committee members, and that's what I'm going to focus my presentation on today. But we also are available to answer any questions you have on all the financial statements that were included in your work package. We're in the process of completing our audit of the financial statements of the consolidated financial statements of the MTA, also the individual subsidiary financial statements for New York City Transit, FEMTAC, which is the First Mutual Transportation Assurance Company, Long Island Railroad, the Metro North Commuter Railroad, MTA Bus, the Staten Island Rapid Transit, and the Triborough Bridge and Transit Authority. We expect to issue those financial statements on Wednesday, assuming that you have no major questions as a part of our presentation. As a part of our audit, we are doing the audit to express an opinion on the financial statements to basically indicate that they are in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. We do look at all the information in your comprehensive annual financial report, but there is some information that is supplemental information that we do disclaim an opinion on, but that's standard procedure. We also look at the internal controls as it relates to the basic financial statements, as well as the compliance with laws and regulations for major federal programs. The single audit will be shared with you at the July meeting, but I can tell you at this point we are substantially complete with that work as well, and we have no findings to present to you today as a result of that. In terms of significant accounting policies, all of the agency's financial statements are on a consistent basis with those from the previous year, except as Pat Kane mentioned to you, there was a change in the accounting principles as it relates to the amortization of the bond discounts and premiums at TBTA. That was the only change in the methods of presentation in these financial statements from year to year. Accounting estimates we do look at. I had shared with you earlier meetings what the risk of our audit was, where we felt the significant risks were, what the material estimates were, and I will share with you just several observations on that as a part of this presentation later. In terms of uncorrected misstatements, there were no past adjustments that we brought to management as a result of the audit, other than at the TBTA. There were two minor adjustments that netted to about $7 million. It related to a timing matter as it related to debt issuance costs. There were some debt issuance costs incurred in this current fiscal year, but they will be paid next year, and that's a timing difference. And then there was also a $5 million difference as it related to depreciation depreciation on some assets that were placed in service before the end of the year, but they weren't actually moved in your financial records at the end of the year. And that's something that, that we did point out to you in prior years, but it's not as material as what it was last year. In terms of any disagreements with management, there were no disagreements with management. There were no difficulties as a result of our audit. And I think one of the major improvements that occurred this year was a recommendation that Mike Vasily had with his team, and that is that we had ongoing status meetings. We had monthly status meetings early as the audit was progressing, and then we went to weekly status meetings as we were completing the audit. We had all of the divisional CFOs and controllers in those meetings, either by phone or live, and I think that was a very positive improvement to the audit process, and it allowed us to address issues. And I think it was also a learning experience from a standpoint of everybody seeing what was happening at the other agencies and being able to think about whether or not there was something that impacted his or her records. And I think that's something that's a positive thing, and I would recommend that we do that on an ongoing basis. Included in the package as well that you have are the management representation letters that management will be providing to us. These are the representations we need under the auditing standards to get from management, and I don't anticipate any issues from that standpoint. As far as emphasis of matter paragraphs, these opinions on our governmental standards basis are longer than what you would see in a commercial environment. They are clean opinions, so there's no qualified opinion, there's no issues from that standpoint, but because there's other information in these reports, and because you're a component unit of the state of New York, we do in fact make those emphasis of matter paragraphs. So just think of those as additional information. There's nothing unusual as it relates to the length of the opinions of the financial statements. From a control standpoint, we will be sharing with you observations that we had on the internal control structure in terms of improvements and any deficiencies that we encountered during the audit. I can share with you today that unlike last year, there are no material weaknesses. There are no significant deficiencies to bring to your attention at this point in time. There might be a significant deficiency, but nothing that needs to be brought to your attention before we issue these financial statements. Mr. Zuckerman, you look like you have a question.
That last sentence was a little strange. There may be some significant deficiencies, but we may not bring it to you. Can you just...
No, we will bring it to your attention. I don't need to bring it to your attention today. I'm sorry if I misspoke. So, no material weaknesses. I'm not aware of any. There's no material weaknesses. I'm not aware of any significant deficiencies as we speak, but we are in the process of analyzing all of our control comments. Something could come to the level of a significant deficiency that requires me to put it in the writing. But I don't want to alarm you at this point. Unlike last year, there's no issues.
On the roof.
In terms of the major estimates, and this appears on page 11 of the handout I gave you, we have certain items that we do look at as a part of the audit. The pension benefit obligation, as Pat mentioned to you, is a very significant estimate. That's $8.1 billion of a liability that's recorded in your financial statements. I do use outside actuarial assistance from my internal actuaries to review what your actuaries have done. We are looking at the way that estimate is recorded. We're looking at the discount rates, the salary assumptions, and things of that nature, and we were comfortable with the assumptions and things that were used in the preparation of that estimate. Likewise, on page 12, we talk about your OPEB liability, which is the health care post-employment liability. That's also a large number. That's $15 billion. It did increase $1.6 billion over the prior year, and we do look at that from that perspective. We also look at the estimates in terms of the self-insurance claims that you have, as well as the obligations that you might have under any insurance types of policies from your self-insurance. And we're looking at that, and we found that to be consistent as well. I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
Bob, I do have a question. I mean, those OPEB liabilities are not by statute, not by contract. Is that correct?
We're not required to fund those liabilities.
Well,
we fund the current cost we fund.
I was more asking, those are post-employment, that's post-employment health care.
Yes.
So we have perhaps a moral obligation, but there is no legal obligation to provide those. True?
It is not protected under the Constitution like pension obligations are. There is a question of, in someone's employment contract, where the references, to that, and so that would have to be looked at. But in terms of state constitution, retirement, post-retirement benefits are not protected.
I mean, well, it's an offline conversation, I suppose, but at some point, do we have to look at, I mean, the cost of those are, yeah. Fair, okay. I have no other questions.
Why is the discount rate for Metro North different than every other division? Page 11. Maybe they're less of a risk in Metro North.
All right, well, if there aren't other questions, we do need a motion and a second to accept Deloitte's audit of the consolidated financial statements and the agency financial statements.
This is contingent, though, on the completion. This is, in some ways, a temporary, right?
Well, I presume what we're doing here is we're accepting these, but you need our acceptance of them for you to finalize them.
We are in a position, once I get the signed management representation letters, to issue these reports.
Motion?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you.
Financial reports.
Okay, so now we'll have, next is the Chief Compliance Officer to give us a briefing on the MTA agency's compliance with state law regarding the filing of financial interest reports. Lamond?
Okay. Thank you. It's that time of the year again. I know everybody's favorite time after you file your taxes, then you can file your financial disclosure statement. We have communicated with all our employees. We have sent the memos that are in this book to them, as well as to our board members as well, reminding them of the obligation to file by May 15th. In the book, you will also see a report that we have provided to this committee, basically outlining the process and the steps that we will be going through. This year, we have, as of now, just around 7,100 filers. And as of the date of the memo in the book, as of last year, every single employee had complied and filed. So hopefully we'll do as well this year.
If there aren't any questions, Lamont, I think you're going to continue in this time to provide us with a status of open recommendations from MTA Audit Services that were accepted by the agencies, highlighting any that remained open more than 6 months past their planned implementation dates.
At this point, there are no open recommendations past 6 months.
Oh, fantastic. And the last item before we go into executive session is an update on the DDCR's performance measures and accomplishments. And Mike Garner, Chief Diversity Officer, is here to provide that update.
Afternoon. We're going to give you a quick overview of our site visits, closeouts, and the MWBE achievement on third track. Naim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As of March 31st, there were over 1,200 contracts which had been closed, contracts with goals, and further 18 contracts in the process being closed, and 49 contracts pending agency action, so that brings it to 1,285. This chart shows progress being made in closing out the contracts which had been open. So as of the first quarter, that's the 1,218 which have been closed as of March 31st. This chart shows the site visits that our managers have made up until March 31st. So on average for the first quarter of 2018, it's about 54 site visits per month being made. As Mike mentioned, we are also reporting on goals being achieved on Long Island Railroad's third track projects. So there are 4 contracts that you see there. 2 are managed by Long Island Railroad, and the last 2 are being managed by the Capital Construction Company. These contracts have goals, and for those contracts, the first 2, the first one is substantially complete, 57% complete, and the other one, which is almost done, 91%. We are, as you can see, we are exceeding the goals in those contracts. And the last 2 contracts, which are listed there, they're fairly new, and the work is being done, and we will have further updates in the future on goal achievement on those contracts.
Let me finish by saying that we're taking an extreme proactive approach to close out of our projects. As a matter of fact, it is my understanding that Lamont Kears and his staff has just finalized an all-agency closeout process. I'm getting actively involved of sending out emails to those agencies in which we are monitoring their contracts that's finished to ask them to give us the notice of final payment so we can close out the projects. And then basically circling back around to the agencies and making sure that those projects are closed out in PeopleSoft. With regard to our MWBE on third track, please note that we are having a big MWBE outreach in Nassau County on Saturday, May 19th, to make sure that all of the MWBE firms in both Nassau and Suffolk are there with all of the prime contractors to better integrate them into the project as these projects are being bought out. And last, I want to just personally thank Mike and his staff, Michelle Woods. They've been instrumental in assisting us in closing our projects and making sure that we have mastered all of the nuances with regard to all of the separate MTA agencies.
Great. Thank you. Questions? Yeah.
Brief question, and we can defer it to our next conversation. I would like to understand at some point how we set the goals and how where they come from and how they're set for various projects based on size or group that are attributed to. I don't need to know that now, but I would like to understand that at some point.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, can I Mike, have we done an audit of the MBWB conformity on 2nd Avenue Subway Phase 1 and so far on East Side Access?
Those projects, as I understand, are FTA funded, so there's a DBE focus and not an MWBE focus. So you're asking whether or not we're effectively monitoring the DBE goals on those contracts.
Right.
2nd Avenue, the second phase.
Well, the first phase.
Right.
Because first phase is done.
Yes.
So we know who got what.
Yes.
East Side Access, we know who got most, if not all, because it's 3/4 done.
Right. Let me circle back around to you, and I will have those metrics very short period of time.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you guys for your work. It's great work. I also think we should thank Mike Fritz and Pat and Michael, Bob, your staff. I mean, I know there's a ton of work that goes into that, and then it comes into this committee, and we get through it in like 15 minutes. But I know it's a tremendous amount of work that you guys do. So thank you very much. With that, I think that we will now go into executive session. We need a motion to go in that executive session.
Yep.
Okay. Motion to go to executive session. Second. Okay, we're going to go into executive session.
We return from executive session. Motion to adjourn the meeting. So moved. Second. All in favor? Aye. All. Thank you all very much.